I'm very glad to be here, very grateful for the invitation to have a chat with you all and to share a bit about my story. Today I will do a quick introduction as to who I am. I will talk for a while about my story. I've got a lot of slides to support it because I think it's more interesting to look at pictures than just my talking head. I'll introduce, you see my Strive for Five logo. I'll talk very little bit about that. But then a big chunk of the time I'll spend today are things like getting the most from chemotherapy, tips as to how to get the most out of life when you've been diagnosed, particularly with stage 4 cancer. And then towards the end, because it is Bowel Cancer Awareness Month, I will just very quickly talk about the signs and symptoms and what you can do to help to reduce the risk. I have to do that for next slide. There we are. So as an introduction, hi. This is who I am. I run a successful business. I travel the world. I teach yoga, occasionally sing with guest vocals with a pop group. And as you can see, a lot of my life revolves around Pippa, who those of you at the meeting earlier got to see her asleep next to me. So this is who I am. This is what I'm about. It so happens that I've got stage 4 colorectal cancer. I am on chemotherapy. I've had surgeries, but I don't allow having stage 4 cancer to define me. The other pictures are the things that define me: family, friends, enjoying travel, etc., living a very full and fulfilling life. But I happen to have stage 4 cancer. I also wear many hats that are relevant to this. I'm not going to go through this in lots and lots of detail, but I'm trained as a clinical biochemist, worked for the NHS for 7 years. I've worked in the pharmaceutical industry for the past 35 years, because obviously I was 6 when I joined. I run a consultancy practice to pharma now. I have stage 4 in the blue hat area. Yes, I have cancer, but I've spent a lot of time as a patient advocate doing things like this. Over the next month, I've got 6 presentations where I'm presenting to scientific researchers to talk to them about why they should be involving patients more and more. Then Strive for 5, I do quite a lot of work volunteering with Cancer Research UK and Bowel Cancer UK, but I'm also involved in a number of clinical trials as either the lead patient, as a patient advisor on PPIs, etc. So I wear multiple hats when I come to events like this and to be able to speak with you. But I can also, the tips that I'm going to give and a lot of the experience isn't just my personal experience. It reflects literally thousands of patients that I've interacted with over the past few years. So hopefully that can make the talk today more interesting for you and more relevant. So moving on to my story, in this I'll talk about my life before I was diagnosed, how I was diagnosed, and then some of the treatments and some of the things that I've been able to do since I was diagnosed. So before diagnosis, going back, I was a very active person. I was a competitive 10K runner. I could run 10 kilometers in 40 minutes. So I was pretty swift on my feet. Went to the gym once or sometimes even twice a day. Lots of yoga, mixed martial arts. Picture of health, basically. I reduced stress. I left corporate life to set up my own consultancy practice to allow me to have a less stressful life. And I hadn't been, when I first started going to the doctor about my symptoms, I hadn't been to the doctor for 7 years. And the last time I'd been was because I've tweaked my knee training. I had Bupa, so private health cover, and the December before I was diagnosed in the May, I was actually going to cancel my Bupa because it didn't seem valuable. I was paying money into it every month. So I thought I can just put that into a savings account, and if I need it, I can call on it. But got distracted and never did, and that's worked in my favor. But I was really healthy. And for most of my friends, I was classed as being one of the fittest people that they knew. And I was a very happy guy. But then things started to change. I was 49 years old and I started to go to the toilet a lot. And by that I mean to have a poo. And it's one of those things around bowel cancer we end up having to talk about going to loo for poos and that sort of thing. And when I say I was going a lot, I was going 12 times a day. So it was frequency. I was going a lot, not a lot was coming out. There was some urgency. Now, at the time, this is some time ago, there was a lot in the press about food intolerance, etc. So I figured that was it because I was feeling fine. And so I just tried eliminating certain things from the diet, testing to see if I was allergic to things, and obviously none of that had any effect. And then I started to feel off, not quite right. For example, there was one morning, me and my friends were staying over at Exmoor for a race in Exmoor, and at breakfast, my friends basically said, "You can't run today, you look terrible." And I was just starting to feel, like I say, a bit off. So I went to the GP and saw a locum and said, "These are my symptoms, I'm going to the toilet a lot, feel a bit run down, might have a bit of an infection." The locum GP agreed, and so he said, "We'll do a test for it." The strange thing, and some of you may have experience of this type of thing, so speaking with the locum GP, unprompted, he turned around to me and said, "Just to reassure you, it's not cancer." Now, I'd not asked the question about cancer, and in fact, it hadn't entered into my mind at that point. But it was really bad, I think, to say that in the way that he did, and completely the wrong time to do that sort of thing. The test came back, testing, and they only tested me for infection, and that came back negative. So I went back to the GP, different locum GP, did a PR exam, which is where she sticks fingers at the bum to see if they can feel anything that's wrong there, and then said, we're going to do a full blood sprint. So she took bloods off me and tested lots and lots of things. I then had to call the receptionist about a week later, and they said, results are all normal, everything's fine. And that was left then. So it was because I said, well, what happens now? They said, well, the results are fine. Do you want to see a doctor again? I said, yes, because all this is wrong. I'm going to the toilet a lot, I'm feeling rough. So yeah, I'd like to see the doctor. So went back, and this time my GP had come back from holiday. So she was very good and said, look, with the things that are going on, oops, sorry, I'll leave that bill there. She referred me to gastroenterology. So I said, we'll get you into there. And that's where Bupa came in, because I said, look, I've got Bupa cover. She said, well, actually, the only real difference is you'll get a nicer sandwich afterwards, but you might as well use your insurance, why not? So I got referred in, met with the gastroenterologist. In that consultation, he did what's called a rigid sigmoidoscopy, which is putting a solid tube up the bum to see if he could see anything there. I had started to get a little bit of bleeding in my poo at that point, and it turned out, because of going to the lot, I developed hemorrhoids. But he thought that might have been what was causing the problem. But he then scheduled me in for a colonoscopy. I went into the colonoscopy. So I'm just trying to make sure we are building. There we go. The colonoscopy was one where they this one, they doped me up a lot. There are different ways of doing the colonoscopy. Sometimes there's very little. Sometimes there's gas and air available if you want it. Most of my colonoscopies I've had over the years have been by a surgeon, and I've been fully anaesthetized. This one, I was doped and I was a bit dozy. There was a lot of having to turn. And when he came and gave me the results that day, they did find an area of ulceration that they couldn't get past. And area of ulceration was the phrase that he used. And he said, but I need to see more about what's going on. So I'm going to send you for a CT scan, and then we'll see what's going on. So this seems to be auto building. The way it works, this is the advantage probably of Bupa, so that was on the Tuesday. I got a phone call on the Wednesday to book me in for a scan the next day. And then on the Friday, I had the results of the scan and the results of all the biopsies. On the Friday, I went along, and with everything that had been said about it's an area of ulceration, with all of the the things that I've been seeing and what I've been reading, I thought I was going in on the Friday to get a result that would say I've got ulcerative colitis or maybe Crohn's disease or something like that. I was prepared for all of that. So I went into the gastroenterologist at midday on my own. And I remember sitting there in front of him, and the clinic nurse came and sat right next to me, which I was a bit surprised at, because normally you just sit with the doctor. And he said, look, I'll tell you straight away, Steve, we've got the results back, and I'm afraid it's not good news. You've got cancer. And he said, 49 years old at the time, I thought that's not good news, obviously. He then said, and it's spread to your liver and both lungs. Now, with my age group, if it's spread to other organs, that's it. And so my immediate thought, well, that's it, it's over then. And I can remember the wash of it hitting me of, it's metastasized, it's spread to other organs. But he was great, and this is where it's so important having a good doctor. So he sat in front of me, and I can remember him saying, repeating, look, you're really fit and healthy. We're going to do our best for you. We've already met as a team. We've got a plan in place for you. And he was doing his best at that point to try and get me onto the front foot. So it's like, we're going to do our best for you. We're going to work on this. And he explained that they were going to go, they'd met as a team already. You're all familiar with the MDT, the multidisciplinary team. And so my MDT happened to have met that morning. So discussed my case and agreed I was going to go straight to surgery. So he explained what was going on, but kept saying, we're going to do our best with you, And I remember him saying that him and his team were in shock because none of them saw me as a cancer patient. They were, we diagnosed a lot of cancer, he said, but we just didn't see it in you. And what they'd seen in the scope, they didn't expect it to come back as cancer. So I then had to get home. And so it was about a 30-minute drive. And so if you're familiar with mindfulness, what I did was practiced extreme mindfulness. I have never been so aware of everything that I was doing driving a car, where I was holding the steering wheel, everything that's going on around me, what I was touching, because I had to just focus on that to get me home. Got home and literally broke down and wailed. And I can remember just not screaming, but it was just deep, wrenching wailing and sobbing. And I don't, if any of you do meditation, there's something called the helicopter thing, where you end up looking at yourself. Now, this wasn't a conscious thing, but I can remember, because being a British bloke, there I was wailing, and part of my brain was going, oh, for God's sake, stop it. What's this helping? Pull yourself together, stop it. But another part of my brain was saying, no, you've got to do this. This is part of the process. It's important that you let it out. And I sort of ended up looking at myself and seeing British me on one shoulder, telling me to pull myself together, and holistic, modern me on the other shoulder, saying, "Look, you've got to do this." And I found it quite funny that these different parts of my personality were arguing, and so I actually found myself laughing about it, which did help. I then got a phone call on my mobile from my surgeon on his mobile, asking if I could go into the clinic, which happened to be at a clinic in Maidenhead, not far from where I live, and saying, could I go in, because he wanted to see me that afternoon. And so I then drove in, saw him, and what a lovely guy. I should say that was the gastroenterologist. That was the last time I saw him. And I'd love to be able to actually chat to him to say what he did was so good. But I then moved into the surgical and oncology sphere. So my surgeon met with me, and he's a specialist colorectal surgeon, and that was good. A lovely guy. He also kept saying to me, "Look, I've treated lots of people for cancer who are older, less healthy than you, and are doing okay. So, you've got a good chance." And so it was, the psychology was really, really important. He kept pushing things forward for me, and he did an exam on me. I couldn't feel anything that was untoward. Bear in mind, this was on the Friday of the bank holiday weekend, and he said, "We're going to operate on Tuesday." And that's not a Bupa thing. That's because they decided I needed I was almost obstructed in terms of the bowel. So the ulceration that they couldn't get past with a colonoscopy was the tumor that was expanding into the bowel and stopping. And the reason I was going to the toilet so often was only little bits of poo could get past at any time. So the bowel was almost completely closed. There was just a little bit. So they decided that the priority for me was remove the primary tumor straight away, as opposed to sometimes they will give chemo to try and reduce the size of it, etc. Said, we've just got to get it out of you. And so that meant that I didn't have very much time. Again, at that point, I was able to drive home quite comfortably. But I had a few days to get myself sorted. I didn't have the dog at that point. And so I was on my own, but realized that I had to then work out. I had to, first of all, tell people. And most of you in this group either have cancer, or are a supporter of somebody with cancer. I had to communicate that I had this disease. And I couldn't mess around because I'd only got a couple of days to get things sorted. So I basically decided that there was a group of friends that I needed to speak to, and family. And I had to call them up and tell them. There were some others where I could send them a message. And then later on, my intention was to send an email to a broader group of friends. It then occurred to me that on a Friday afternoon, a phone call out of the blue from me could find them driving, could find them in meetings, etc. But seeing a phone call from me, what did they do? So I was having to send messages saying, I could do with having a chat. Whenever you're free, don't worry, it's not urgent. Trying not to alarm them and give them warning bells so that if they were driving, they'd get panicky, etc. My sister, bless her, was actually about to present at a conference, and because she's a teacher, specialist teacher, and so she messaged me back saying, "I'm about to give a presentation. Do I need to call you now?" And I tried to reply with, "No, don't worry. You do what you need to." But of course, she was already in panic mode because I don't send texts saying I could do with a chat. So got to speak to my friends, and the first one I spoke to, I remember Amanda. I couldn't say the word cancer. It choked in my throat. And I was trying to say that I got cancer. Then when I managed to say it, I tried to say that it had spread and that. And again, I couldn't get the words out. And it was actually by making myself speak to my friends that started the process of me being able to deal with it, to interpret it. But it was forced because I didn't have very much time. I had to get my act together. One of my very good friends, I live in just north of Reading, a place called Caversham now. I lived in Maidenhead back then. One of my very best friends, Tracy, lives in Lancaster. And she basically, when I told her, she said, "I'll come down." Can you go, bear in mind, this is Bank Holiday Friday. She said, "Mark and I will come down, and we'll, put my son will go and stay with with his nan. We'll come down and spend time with you." And of course, I did the typical, "No, don't put yourself out for me. Don't you worry. It'll be a terrible drive. You don't want to be doing any of that." And she messaged me later on and said, "Look, please, can I come?" And I, again, that was a realization that it wasn't all about me. Yes, it was happening to me, but it was also happening to my friends and family, and that I had to let them help. I had to allow them in. So that night, my friend Amanda came around to see me. The next day, two of my friends, Danny and Joss, came and stayed over. So we went out and had dinner. We got drunk and talked through it all, and talked through some of my fears. There was a lot of tears, but there was making me talk about it. And then the next day, Tracy and Mark drove down and they spent time with me, etc. And so I had to then prep for going into hospital, going into surgery, and how I was going to do things. I had to buy pajamas. I've got shorts and a t-shirt. It was like, I realized I was going to be spending a week in hospital. And so I had to, one of my friends then gave me a lift so that we could go to Marks and Spencer's, because it was the only place we could think of to buy PJs. So it was things like that. It was equipping myself for a hospital stay was odd. The other thing, I will get back to all the slides in a little bit, but I hope this is interesting for you. The other thing was that I'd only ever been in hospital once before, and it was many years before for a very small op. I was in hospital for 2 days. On that occasion, one day at the same time, I had 15 friends turn up at the hospital, and the next day, nobody. And so with my friend Danny, I said, look, can we do something where I get a couple of visitors a day? Because it'll really help me to break the time up in hospital. So we decided, okay, we're going to do that. And we set it up. So I did the email out to all my friends, and I'll come back to that in a moment, and introduced the fact that if they wanted to come and visit, to let Danny know, and she would coordinate things. And that worked. It worked really well. So I had a couple of visitors a day, and everybody was briefed, come in for about half an hour because I'll be exhausted recovering from the op, because lower abdominal resection is a big bowel op. It was an open surgery for me, and it does knock you about. But it was great to have friends coming in. The thing then is that actually, when I went home, I still needed support. So I hadn't realized it, but one of the people that, I will try not to get emotional now, one of the people that had contacted Danny to say, I want to help, is my friend Shelley in America. So she came over and stayed for the first week after being in hospital to take care of me and cook for me and fill my freezer with home cooked meals, which was very nice. When she went back to the States, my friend Tracy came down and looked after me for the next week, because having had major bowel surgery, I couldn't even pick a kettle up. Walking around the house was really difficult. Coming downstairs was exhausting. And so I needed help and support. Again, that was something that I had to accept. I had to give away control of my life for a while and accept that I couldn't control my life. Making the decision to have people allocated to come in and see me was the last conscious thing that I did to be in control of my life for a period of time. And that carried on. And actually, that schedule became known as my dance card, and went on for actually months afterwards, and became a really popular thing. So every day I'd have a couple of people coming in to see me. When I started on chemo, and chemo was knocking me around a little bit at the start, I had friends coming in and still cooking for me and still making sure I was okay. And it really made a difference. The other thing was the email that I sent out has become known as the My Dear Friends emails. So because the first email I started with, My Dear Friends, I've got some bad news. As I went through prepping for surgery, going in for the operation, and then moving on, recovering from the op, getting ready for chemo, going through chemo, I sent an email out every week or so to my friends, My Dear Friends, and it was the update. And it was lighthearted, there was fun things that were happening, it was updates on what was going on. And like all of us, these days, we have friends far and wide. Friends aren't just in the close locality. So it meant that my friends that were distant geographically were still able to feel involved, and they could communicate and all of that. But it also was a good process for me to be able to write these things and to see how I was, and to reflect on what was going on. So all of that really helped. And it meant that I recovered from surgery really quite quickly, and then was able to go in and start on my chemo. At this point, Vicky, let's go back to the slides, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So I will resume my story within this. Hopefully that was interesting to give you that, and I can build onto things now. There you go. So good, I'm in charge of it here, and I can see all my preview screens and that's so much better. So that's told you, but I'll go back and tell you a little bit about technical stuff. So I was diagnosed, as you know, at stage 4. For those of you that know about colorectal cancer, I have what's called a KRAS mutation. What that means is there's certain types of chemo that don't work for it. Survival rates are a bit lower. So it's a little bit harder to treat as far as the chemotherapy side of things is concerned. My primary tumor, the reason that they struggled with it was that it was 23 centimeters long and 6.5 centimeters wide. To put that into perspective, the typical size of a colorectal tumor is between a 20p and a 50p piece. When my surgeon took it out the next day, when he came to see me, he said, think large German sausage, because it had grown along my bowel. I had 3 mets in my liver at diagnosis, 8 in my lungs, and the ones in my lungs were all 2 to 3 centimeters in size. So if you think about 8 lots of 2 centimeters, a lot of my lung had gone, but it wasn't affecting my breathing. So I had the abdominal resection, the big surgery, and then when I met the oncologist, he said the aim of chemo here is just to shrink the lungs and the liver so that we can operate on them. At that point, because the mets in my lungs in particular were across my lungs and more than one organ was involved, they couldn't just go in and zap them or deal with them. They had to attack them with chemo. So I went on to what's called intense chemo. That was 12 cycles, so 6 months of every 2 weeks having chemotherapy. It was a regimen called FOLFIRI, and that's 6 to 8 hours in the chair in the hospital. And then I had a bottle of 5-FU chemotherapy attached to me for 2 days, for 48 hours. So I'd be wandering around with a little tube coming out of my chest and a little bottle that I got used to living with. So it would, generally speaking, I carry it in like a camera case. But I even went to a friend's wedding and had it in the inside pocket of my suit. Just looked a little bit odd with a bulge coming out my right chest. So I had 12 cycles of intense chemo. And as I say, the aim of that chemo was to shrink the tumors to a size of around 1 to 1.5 centimeters so that they could do what's called ablation. They could zap them with a laser. That chemo was so successful that we didn't have to have an operation afterwards. So at the end of chemo, my liver was clear. My left lung was clear, and my right lung I had 3 tiny dots left, which they thought were probably just scar tissue from the tumours. Speaking to both my oncologist and my colorectal nurse, my chemo nurse that was looking after me, they both said that they thought half of the results were from the chemo, and half of it was from the approach that I'd taken to it, because I'd taken it on really positively. And I'll come on to how that happened and what I was able to do. So after the intense chemo had finished, we then did something I didn't know existed even then, which is I was moved on to maintenance chemo. It was just first introduced to me as a lifetime chemo, which I've been on ever since. And so I'm on maintenance chemo, and the aim of this is to control the cancer and allow me to live a good life, to allow me to do as much as I can. Now, I spoke to Vicky yesterday, but one of the things I think is really important around this is I would be classed typically as having incurable cancer. I don't think that's a very helpful label to have. Likewise, I don't think calling this lifetime chemo or palliative chemo isn't helpful. It's maintenance chemo. It's there to control the cancer. In the same way as if you have hypertension or high blood pressure or diabetes, they can't cure those diseases, but they don't label them incurable, and they don't give you palliative treatment for it. It is palliative, but they don't label it as that. So as I say, I'm on maintenance chemo, and that's what's helped me and has kept me going. In the years that I've been on that, I've had a few recurrences. Most of them, by just keeping things going, have then gone away, mainly in the lymph nodes. There was one long recurrence that was big enough and stayed around it long enough that I needed to ablate it. So that's where they, in the operating theatre, you're inside a CT scanner. They put a needle right into the tumour, and they then pass a laser beam in through the needle and zap it inside you. It's like science fiction for me, but it was really effective and really quick to recover from. I had what's called dilatation of the anastomosis. I have to really concentrate to be able to get my teeth straight to be able to say that one. The anastomosis is when they connect the bowel back together, and the joining 2 tubes in the body is called anastomosis. And because it's scar tissue on me, that had started to constrict, it started to shrink. So they had to stretch that, which is another procedure I've gone through. I've had multiple colonoscopies and several sigmoidoscopies over these. So those are all the things those are the numbers that go around my cancer story. And perhaps the key ones is that I've now had clear scans for over 4 years. I haven't had any cancer surgery for over 6 years. And in a few weeks' time, I'll be celebrating 10 years with stage 4 colorectal cancer. So, and the reason that I'm here is because of great medical team, great surgical team, amazing chemotherapy advances that have taken place over the last few decades. That's why I'm here. I mentioned when I was prepping for this, I on some of the forums, I said, what should I be talking about? What would you as patients want to hear from me? And one of the things is, how do you cope with everything? So this is a very quick slide just saying about it. And in the early days, apart from the immediate 2 days after the operation, one of the things was every day getting up and getting dressed. Doesn't matter how I felt. I got out of my PJs and into like day clothes, even if it was day clothes that was tracky bottoms and a slobby top. It was still getting up, sitting up, moving around. Now, it's not always possible, depending on what type of chemo you're on or what type of surgery you had. You're not always able to get out and walk lots, but it was doing as much as I could. And getting up and moving around just made a huge difference. And so it was just really helpful to be able to do that, and it made such a difference. I mentioned about how much I relied upon my friends and family. The communication with them was key. It was forced upon me because of the intensity early on, but I was able to get into it and to learn to communicate with them. A part of that was actually me having to say to them, this is what I need. And I think that's one of the things as we go through cancer. People want to help us and want to support us, but they don't know what to do for us. And that's because it's different for all of us at different points in our cancer journey. So it's up to us to tell people what we need, and also to tell them how to speak to us. You know, if there's certain words that trigger you, if there's certain things you don't want said, you can say, I don't want to talk about that, or don't use that. I'd rather say this. And so I think that's worth doing. And an example, it was over the summer that I was there, I became aware that my garden was getting overgrown. And so on my dear friend's email, I said, is there anybody that can give me a hand with the garden? Because I literally couldn't have done anything. Doing things like trimming the hedges and that sort of thing, simply out of my scope at that point. And one weekend, I had 6 friends doing mowing the lawn, trimming hedges, cutting bushes back, and that sort of thing, while I was sitting there with a cup of tea, directing traffic. And they were just pleased to know what to do. Early after my surgery, one of my friends would take me to the supermarket because I couldn't push the trolley and I couldn't drive. So his thing was he helped with that, and it just made a difference. And I will say, I've now got a better relationship with my friends and family than I've ever had at any point in my life because of having gone through this with them. I'm conscious of time. I'll move things on a little bit. So mindfulness and meditation, all of this sort of thing made a big difference. I was already into yoga, so I knew about meditation. But if you haven't tried it, it's worth trying to get into. It really helps you to process things and to see things positively. Acupuncture and craniosacral therapy, both I used during my intense chemotherapy. And I truly believed, and that both of them with the support of my oncologist. So anything like this that you're thinking doing, check with your oncologist first. And I think both of these things help me to cope better with the chemotherapy and to recover better from it. Speaking to friends and family is key, but speaking to like-minded people, I think that a network like this is really important. And that's where I'm talking about online forums. There are different groups. I realize you guys have got WhatsApp groups. There are different forums, where like Facebook groups, etc. But again, making sure that they're safe ones. That's really, really important. There are a number of organizations who are incredible. I'm mentioning a few here. Now, I haven't actually used any of these, but I've seen the work they do, and what they do is incredible. So Maggie's, all of the major cancer hospitals have a Maggie's centre within them, but they also do online support. Penny Brownie is based in South Wales. Again, they do weekend retreats where you can go and get support around recovering from cancer, but they do online stuff as well. In Berkshire, we have the Cancer Champions, you as a group, and also My Cancer, My Choices. Around the country, there are lots of different organisations. So finding safe places is really worth it, because you shouldn't be expected to do it on your own. You don't have to cope with this on your own. There is actually more and more support these days. I will very briefly talk about some of the achievements I've had since I was diagnosed in the 10 years. Again, typical British bloke. I don't like saying, look at me, aren't I great? I've done all of these things. Haha. This is about saying, I have stage 4 cancer and I've been able to do these things, because these days, this is what stage 4 cancer can look like. So this is just some of the things. So over the years, I've traveled a lot. The picture with the red top, that's me with friends in Bali. The one with the camera, that's me in the rainforest in Borneo, where I was walking around with sun bears and orangutans, literally within a few feet of wild orangutans. Top right-hand corner, much more local, my first visit to Stonehenge with a group of friends. I went into the Arctic Circle on holiday, doing skidoos across the frozen wastelands, and also got to meet the real Santa Claus while I was in the Arctic Circle. I got to give away my niece to a wedding last year. So I acted as father of the bride there. I had to wear a tie. That was a bit rough. I qualified as a yoga teacher. I have passed my red belt in mixed martial arts. Grew one hell of a beard. I'm at different phases of beards at different points, but that photo with the 5 is a year's sponsored growth. I've been featured in a few books. I do a lot of active campaigning. That's me with Cancer Research UK at Parliament 2 weeks ago, meeting with the Shadow Secretary of Public Health. I've been lucky enough to be presented with a few awards. The picture at the bottom there is, that was a party that I had to celebrate reaching 5 years with stage 4. There were about 300 people that came along to party with me, where I got to say thank you to everybody. It was like a mini festival. So we had 8 live acts during the day. It was right on the river, so in Bourne End. So we had boat trips going up and down the river, and the weather was perfect for me. The paperwork I had to do for the weather was incredible. And I will be, in a few weeks' time, celebrating what I'm calling tenacity, getting to and living through 10 years. So again, I'm trying to say, that's not a brag file. That's saying this is life, or can be life, with stage 4 cancer. I'll very quickly say a few words regarding Strive 5, because you see the logo on it, and I want to say what it's about. The reason Strive 5 exists is because modern treatments have advanced so much, and it's incredible the difference that they've made. Because of that, people are living longer and longer. In the early days when I was diagnosed, there was nothing positive out there about stage 4. You Googled about stage 4 cancer, it just said you're going to die, and you're going to die soon. So I set up Strive 5 in 2017, purely to give hope to people with, at that point, stage 4 bowel cancer. It's all cancers, and it's just to reflect that. So I share tips, information. I'll talk through some of the tips shortly. As long as there's time, Vicky, I'm very conscious that I'm talking a lot. But it's about helping people to be on their front foot, to be positive around the fact that more people are living longer, fuller lives, and that, fulfilling lives with stage 4 cancer. And that's what Strive for 5 is all about. I've got a couple of tips that I'll give around chemo, and this particularly, so I've got a number of tips I'd like to share, but there's a batch here about what I call getting the most out of chemo. And the first thing I just want to explain, and this goes for almost all cancers, there are lots and lots of different approaches to chemotherapy. And actually, not all chemo is chemotherapy these days, because you have biologicals and immunotherapies and that sort of thing. But I'm grouping all of that under the title of chemo, because for us, that's sort of what it is. There's what's called neoadjuvant and adjuvant chemo. So neoadjuvant is what's used preoperatively. So if they want to try and shrink the tumor to make sure they've got clear margins before surgery, that'll sometimes be chemo with radiotherapy or chemotherapy alone. And so they'll do that before the surgery, and then you have your operation. Whereas adjuvant is when you've had your operation and they want to mop things up. So typically that's used for if you've got stage 2 or particularly stage 3. You'll hear it called mop-up chemo, but the technical term is adjuvant. I mentioned about the intense. Intense chemo is for stage 4, and that's where they're looking to treat distant metastases with quite heavy, relatively heavy chemo, basically, trying to give it a whack. And then you've got the bottom right-hand corner. I've already spoken about this, but what I would call maintenance chemo. You will sometimes hear it called palliative chemo. But within that, so approaching chemo, I didn't, I should say, with all of my experience, 30 odd years working in pharmaceuticals, 7 years before that as a biochemist, I psyched myself out of chemotherapy. I was scared of it because I was looking at all the information that was given me, which was just listing all the side effects. I'd heard all the stories, I've seen all the photographs of what chemotherapy is like. And the first cycle of chemotherapy for me was actually the worst one, because that's the one that was fear-filled. I was scared of it and I made myself ill. I went in that day exhausted because I hadn't slept the night before. I struggled during the day. I had to be given a lift to and from chemo. And literally my friend had to pull me into his car and got me home where a couple of friends were ready to do dinner for me. And I just had to go to sleep. And I've got this bottle attached to me. I really struggled with it. On day 2 or day 3, I was sitting there in my lounge, starting to feel nauseous. And I caught myself thinking, here you go. You knew this was coming. This is it now. And I realized that that was how I was thinking. And I'd spent several days thinking it and convinced that I'm going to become really ill because of chemo. And so I thought, no, hang on a second. I'm making some of this happen. So I got one of the booklets from what is now called Bowel Cancer UK, was having a look through that thing, and saw some common sense advice, which I applied. One of which is, if you're feeling sick, like you're going to vomit, don't curl up into a ball and lie down. And if you think about that from a logical point of view, that makes sense, because if you lie down, your stomach's going to empty. And so actually sitting upright or standing up is a better position to help with nausea. It also said, if you can, walk around a bit and have a bit of toast. I did those things and started to feel a bit better. And so I realized that I was the one that was making chemo worse. It was all in here. It was all in my head. And so that's one of the reasons why, and I firmly believe in this. The first big tip is welcome your chemo. If you're facing chemo, whatever type of chemo it is, see it positively, see it as a friend. I know people that view it as their army, their soldiers that are going into battle for them. Others that see it as, it's my superhero fighting for me. Others, it's a friend. I just see chemo as my friend. I look forward to my chemotherapy cycles. I had chemo literally 2 days ago. As my latest one, and I'm currently going through a week of tablets. It's yours. It's there. It's your friend. The complicating thing with chemo is that the good things it's doing for you by fighting the cancer are quiet. You're not very we don't feel it working. Unlike if you've got high blood pressure and you're feeling dizzy, you take the tablets and you don't feel dizzy. It doesn't work like that with chemo. It's a quiet positive thing, but some of the potentially negative things tend to be the things that we see and are aware of. So don't focus on those. See it as being your friend. And the phrase that I wrote around that is, it's not my cancer. The cancer is something alien in my body. It's not mine. But the chemo is mine because it's there to help me. It's my friend. And I talk quite a lot in this about mindset, about having a positive mindset, etc. And I do get asked, well, some people say there's no evidence that a positive or negative mindset makes a difference in medicine. And I have to say, I disagree. It's actually very much clinically proven. You've probably all heard of the placebo effect. This is that something that has no clinical power, like a sugar tablet or something like that, has been shown, could be shown in 10% or 20% of people to actually take away the symptoms. It's the placebo effect. If you think something is going to do you good, it's more likely to do you good. That's the the proof of positive mindset. Absolutely. The thing that's not talked about as much is the nocebo effect. The fact that actually, if you're convinced something is going to harm you or isn't going to work, it's more likely to fail. And I'm an example of the nocebo effect, because that first cycle I talked about, I was making it I was creating side effects. And so if we're aware of this, actually trying to get our own mindset as far as our treatment's concerned, more to the placebo side of things, the positive side of things than the nocebo, then we can do things to help. It's also, the onus is also on our doctors and nurses to help us do that. And at the moment, I think that's something that they need to improve. But this, I think, is really, really important. And I would say as well, keeping a chemo diary. So this is absolutely key. Each day that you're going through chemo, especially your first few cycles, making a note of how you're feeling each day is great for 2 reasons. Firstly, when you go back in to see the nurses, they will say, how have you been? You can talk through it and explain how you're feeling. Secondly, you can compare cycle to cycle to see if you're feeling better or worse. And actually, then the third thing is that you can plan things. So I knew that days 3 and 4 for me were going to be really low days. So that's when my steroids had stopped and I was exhausted. And what I found was that if I took things really easy on those 2 days, the rest of the cycle during intense chemo was fine. If I pushed those 2 days, I was wiped out for the entire cycle. When I got it sorted and worked this out, I was able to, on my middle weekend of chemo, I went on holiday to Spain. I helped teach yoga in Germany. And I spent Thanksgiving in America, in New York, while on chemo, all with the blessing of my oncologist, all because I kept a diary and I could plan things out. The last thing I'll say on all this is, don't fear a dose drop. And this is a weird one. This is particularly a chemo thing. And the reason it's important is that chemotherapy is the opposite of most types of medicine. And again, I can put one of my other hats on here with my experience in pharmaceuticals. Almost every other type of medicine, you start on a very low dose and you build it up steadily over weeks or maybe even months. And the idea is you get to a level then that starts to show effect. With chemo, there's a calculation done generally on your body weight, and then they give you the maximum dose that they can, because what you have needs to be dealt with. And what they then look to do is to reduce it to a level that you find tolerable. The issue is that most of us fear the idea of a dose drop because we think if we're going to be given less drug, it's going to be less effective. Whereas actually, it's really important that we have less drug because then it can become more tolerable for us. If it stays more tolerable, we can have more, we can have it for longer. We'll be able to complete our cycles, etc. And so it's really important that you tell your chemo nurses about your side effects. And if they do say they're going to reduce the dosage, don't worry about it. And I think that's really, really important. At that point, I've just seen the time. Vicky, I've talked a lot. I do have a lot more, as you know, more tips to talk through. How do you want to do things?
Well, I think it's really interesting. I think, do you want to just run through the tips and then we can see if we have any questions?
Sure, no problem. I'll do these as a fly through, no problems. First thing is, it's really important to accept your diagnosis. A lot of people try and find, why me, why did it happen to me? If it's not really obvious what caused it, in bowel cancer, 50% of cases have no known cause. So don't chase the why me, just accept the fact that you've got the disease. Now it's time to do something about it and focus that energy and effort on getting it treated and getting healthy again. Something that I know that you talk about in this group, Vicky and I spoke about it, is taking things one step at a time. Right from diagnosis, I wanted to be part of the small group that got to 5 years. But if I always looked at 5 years, it was scary. It was too much to do. So I focused on what's the next thing, getting ready for surgery, recovering from surgery, getting ready for chemo, etc. What's the next thing? What can I, and you can control those things. So take your journey one step at a time. I could talk about this slide for a very long time. I will say it very, very quickly. Find safe information. Google is a great resource and it's also a terrible resource. There is a lot of rubbish out there. There's a lot of nonsense about you can cure it with herbs, etc. And there's also, we have to, as patients and carers, have to be able to filter the information we get. If somebody's published a book about how they beat cancer, that's how they beat cancer. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you do it, you will. And there's a lot of things out there that are not evidence-based, and you've got to be really careful how you filter that information. So you've got to find your way to safe and reputable sites. And I think that's something that healthcare could improve, but finding your way to a group like this one is a big step onto it. So getting safe and reliable information is key. If you have stage 4 cancer, don't worry if you can't be cured. There's a lot in cancer, as I mentioned before, about curable or incurable, but actually these days it quite often can be controllable. My cancer isn't curable as such, but here I am 10 years and literally flying. I don't know how long I'm going to be here for, but I'm starting to have to look at finance again now because I'm having to plan quite far ahead, and that's a nice problem to have. A big thing that we all face is anxiety. So the fear of having the scan and what's it going to tell us. This is how I deal with anxiety. And I've shared it with lots of people, and a lot of people found it very helpful. And that is that I try and approach it, there's no such thing as bad news from a scan. If my scan comes back clear or stable, happy days, party time, celebrate. If it comes back that there's new growth or the control isn't there, that's actually also good news because it means that we can deal with it. Not knowing that the cancer's back is the worst thing. So I'd rather know it's there and I can do something about it. So the way I cope with anxiety is by saying to myself, there isn't any bad news. I will be informed about what's happening in my body. I've got a couple of related ones here now. Survival rates, we all look at them. You know, you get diagnosed, especially stage 4. When I was diagnosed, I saw that there was a 4% chance of me getting to 5 years. 4%. I had a less than 60% chance of getting through the first year. The key thing about that is that those stats aren't about me. It's retrospective data. It's about the population as a whole with whatever other things are going on with them. Survival rates are not helpful for predicting how we as individuals will do. They are really useful to look at to see how survival is increasing over time, which it is significantly, and to be able to compare between countries and between hospitals. But it's not a way to predict, are we going to be alive in 1 year, 5 years, etc. Likewise, your doctor will, again, this is particularly with advanced cancer, with stage 4 cancer, you will likely be told a prognosis. At the end of my 6 months of intense chemo, my doctor said I can't see beyond a year to 18 months from that point. And that's not him being cruel, that's him giving his professional opinion. So what I did was each time we had that conversation, I set that year, 18 months as a target to beat. So 3 months later, I'd have the same conversation, he'd say a year to 18 months, and that target just kept moving further back. And then we got to 5 years, and he said, let's aim at 10. Now I'm at 10 years, we don't know where to go. But see the prognosis as a target to beat, and I promise you, your doctor will be the happiest person to be wrong on this. So I think that's a key thing. I think it's important to be kind to yourself. As we go through this is a tough old journey. And there are times when this can be really hard. And there's times when we can't do things that we want to do. And there was one occasion, I remember with a friend of mine, Carol, I got really angry with me, about me. It was like, Ugh. And she just quietly said, be kind to yourself, give yourself a break. And I think it's important that we do that. So we have to be kind to ourselves. And I think it's really important to have fun. Don't get lost in all of this. Cancer's tough. There's no doubt. Again, having advanced cancer is tough. But try and do fun things. Like I said, during intense chemo, I had a weekend in Spain at a friend's villa. I went to Frankfurt to see loads of friends that do yoga and help to teach that weekend. All the way through, I've done things that are fun, not so I don't get lost in having cancer. In the same way as I said at the start, I don't let cancer define me. I want to make sure that during these years, which are my bonus years, I get to live a fun and fulfilling life. And linked to all of this, I'm not going to go into this a lot, recognize the good stuff. It's really important to see that in amongst having this, there are good things going on. One of the things that I say, it's my relationship with friends and family is way better than it's ever been. My outlook on life is way better than it was. And my last of the tips is to say, if you need a second opinion, don't be afraid to ask for one. A doctor should not be offended at this. And if you're going to have a second opinion, try and go to one of the major cancer centers. If you're in a major cancer center, getting a different doctor in the same center is fine. This is a quote from the black box. You see, it's Jamie Murphy is a specialist surgeon at Imperial College London. He works with my oncologist, and he shared this information. This is American data, and it skews in different ways because it's American. But the key thing is that a lot of people that go for second opinions get a refined diagnosis or a changed diagnosis. And so if you're going to your doctor and the doctor said there's nothing else that can be done, you may find that in a specialist center, there will be new things that your doctor wasn't aware of. It may be that they look at the scans in a different way. So it can be worth getting, if you need to, getting a second opinion. Because stats can be misleading. This isn't saying that 88% of all people will benefit from a second opinion. This is of people that were concerned and having problems that went for a second opinion. 88% of them had a change of diagnosis. So the vast majority of people don't need a second opinion. So please don't read this as me saying you all need to go and ask your doctor to see a different doctor. I haven't needed one. The majority of the time, we don't. But if you're concerned, if you think things aren't quite right, don't be afraid to ask for a second opinion. And I'll just leave you with a final thought, which I think is a quote that Vicky shared advertising this. This is something I wrote a few years ago, which is that a diagnosis of stage 4 cancer doesn't have to mean the end of your life. And I hope you've seen, as I've told my story, it can be the reason to start living it. So thank you very much for your attention.